Hello everyone, welcome to Closing the Loop. My name is Himanshu Arti and I'm part of Ananas. Closing the Loop is a series of conversations hosted by team members of Ananas. It evolves from the need to be more resilient, to move towards regenerative living, and to think whole systems. So we'll be talking about food, forests, water, shelter, animals, people, and communities. We share our experiences and learn from people in the fields who make this world a better place. Today, we're going to be talking about communities, and we have with us Sameer Sisodia. Sameer lived the typical fast paced techie life, spending hours in front of a computer coding algorithms. Today, he's a serial entrepreneur and advocates for all things slow, steady, and regenerative. He is the co-founder of Linga and Bee Forest, which sets up farming collectives and communities all over the country. He also recently started something called the Resilience Chat, where we talk about our journey to become more regenerative and resilient. He's super inspiring. We have a few questions for him today. Let's hear what he says. Hey Samir, thanks for coming to Closing the Loop. I'll straight jump into the questions. So,
Yes,
life in the city or life outside?
outside.
So, why is that also the reason why you've started the farming collectives and so on? Is there?
Yeah, it's a big part of the reason because a lot of people who were imagining a different way of living started. We've been thinking how to live differently, right? And it didn't start with life outside the city per se, but a lot of the attributes turned out to be a negation or a reversal of what we've been doing in the city, right? In terms of our footprint, in terms of how we look at community in the apartments and all of that, and how our surroundings look and feel. And in the more recent past, food became a part of it, energy became a part of it, and the answers to a lot of those things lead you to the farm in the village.
Right.
So
So is there something that so is it can't cities replicate something like this? I mean, within the urban landscape, can't we do something like this to get
they
a tangible?
can. It'll. There's nothing stopping us. I don't know. There's been this article going around about how do you reimagine landscapes completely. Uh, I think it's on some of the permaculture groups as well.
Yeah.
I had a long chat with Ashwin Mahesh once on this.
Hmm.
That if he could go rewind back in time, and every 10 acres that got added to the city, if he could keep 4 acres or 5 acres for high rise, high density living and development, and leave the rest immutably as a forest or a farm, right? Like from there on, you cannot touch it anymore. That solve a whole bunch of things that I can imagine, right? So and that's when going high density makes sense if it allows you and affords you to leave the rest alone, right? If you go high density everywhere, what have you really achieved,
Right.
right?
Right.
Bangalore sits in the middle of good rainfall, good soil, and all of that. And here we are going, 70, 80 kilometers away in places with much lesser rainfall, soil that's gotten degraded over time, and struggling to actually grow stuff. And where we live is the best place for doing it actually. So it could have been
Nice.
very, very different, but just hasn't happened.
Nice. So actually, in fact, we also think about it quite a bit about like growing food while we're growing food and guard food forests in the lakes and like urban common spaces, and we are doing calculations as to see how much space do we actually have within the city, and we realize that the rooftops, just the rooftops alone, there's so much food that one can possibly
Yeah,
grow because most of
absolutely.
our rooftops are underutilized in the first place.
Yeah.
So so cool. So one thing is when you go ahead and start these communities, one of the challenges that we also have is maintaining the vision of a community before it, you know, sort of descends into all sorts of chaos. So how do you manage that challenge? Uh,
So the second part is not automatically true to start
uh-huh.
with, right?
Okay.
Um, it also happens when your vision is very, 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 very narrowly defined and very rigid, right?
Right.
So if it's so, I think there's an art to leaving it at a broader vision, at a broader framework level. You know, draw the line in the sand on some things that really matter, but let also allow for a space where there's a lot of evolution. A lot of people will outthink you on a lot of the ideas, right? So you want that to happen. So you're providing a broad framework, but beyond that, the vision isn't limiting for most people in most senses, right? And when the final materialized vision is something that comes from them, and it's something they think through over time and it evolves, then the sense of ownership is naturally much higher, right? Yes, it does help at a place like a collective where there's a shared ethos, right? And that's what we say is very different from an apartment community, for instance. Here we are consumers coming together to, how should I say, somehow keep it running. And there we are trying to actually hit the ball out of the park on at least a dozen different things, right? We are looking to experiment on, and we're looking to get to places we haven't imagined right now on multiple different things. So we're not just trying to plan at a common minimum plan level. Yeah.
Right.
So my experience has been quite the opposite, actually. I mean, it's never descended into chaos.
Right, right. So the one of the challenges with the broader vision, like you mentioned, also is that where do you contain that in a way, right? There are people who do, I mean, in collectives, there are people who do go outside that, and then they don't quite understand that. How do you resolve that issue? So how broad is broad? Are we talking about in terms of in terms of the vision and so on?
So yeah, I mean, if you got to know what your non-negotiables are to start with.
Right, right.
Right, like at TVC, for instance, we knew that it had to be something. We didn't even start with permaculture, to be honest, right? It had to be something to do with the natural farming.
Right.
And as we didn't even we didn't I don't think any of us understood very clearly what it meant when we said natural farming.
Right.
Right, we committed to reading up on it, we committed to learning about it, and so on and so forth, and we realized that it had to be regenerative. That's when we picked up the idea of
Right.
efforts being regenerative out there. And from there, we started depending heavily on permaculture and started talking to you guys, and a lot of that happened. Right. So, but the line that was drawn in the sand was it had to be as naturally aligned as possible.
Right. 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 So,
and yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things like that. There's the then when we came across permaculture, there were new ideas there. When we spoke to the folks at Navdarshanam, there were new ideas there, and we borrowed very heavily from those ideas, because now they were starting to fit in within these within the broader framework and the broader vision that we had created initially, right? So I don't think you can define it upfront, and yes, it needs a fair bit of hand-holding, monitoring, refereeing, back and forth, open-mindedness at the same time, because it would be absurd to say that I had this very clear vision of what it needs to be right at the beginning, right? And all of us have learned from all of us.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a single answer to that. I don't think there's a very crisp definition of.
Yeah. I think also getting together like 50 people and then communicating something like this could also, so that leads us to the next question, which is that should it have a hierarchy? Should a collective have hierarchy in any sense? Do you find that as some sort of a need, or I mean, what do you think about that?
So the hierarchies, yeah, you do need hierarchy when faced with decision making. That's where you need not so much of a hierarchy. You need some sort of a structure to it, right? Hierarchy implies that somebody is reporting into somebody else in some sense. We do have that in the team at the farm, because that's a executive structure, right? But in the decision making, in the visioning, amongst the members, and with that, it's decision making structure than a hierarchy, right? So you there are formal informal ways of breaking a deadlock, vetoing certain things, and so on and so forth that happen, right? Happy to say that never needed to get there really.
Yeah,
More
that's
discussion. Yeah.
right. So one other question that we had was, quick, where does one draw the line between, of course, like when we were talking about vision, where does one draw the line between needs and wants in the collective, right? Relevant one is from the whole collective and consumption point of view. So how do you,
Mhm.
like, do you define it and then present it to the community, or do you take it from the people and the need evolves, the needs and the wants evolves from the community? How does that work?
So both have happened. We've actually collected needs as a formal mechanism, and a relook at a lot of the needs in the context of energy, in the context of the size of the house itself, and so on and so forth. But I think a pre-step to all of this is whose needs, right?
Right.
It's not just the members and the human beings. It's not just the members. It's not all human beings themselves, including the team members and all of that. It's also like if you were looking at soil rebuilding, so whatever came in the way of actually rebuilding soil, right, had to take a backseat. So the primary need was in the initial years is what the soil needs and what the ecosystem needs,
Right.
right? And then as more people started appreciating that we were just into a forest and so on and so forth, and the needs of the wild, right, that became part of the picture as well. So uh, so so to start with, like, whose needs, and then yes, both things have happened. We've asked people for the needs, but we've also asked people to very very hard to consider needs on practically every dimension of the thing,
Right.
and
Right.
people have.
Right.
There have been a few trade-offs. We're still not doing composting toilets in all the
Mm.
houses, and will tell whether this is a bad decision, because 50 houses and Western lose, there's a lot of consumption, right?
Right.
But we'll figure it out. Yeah.
Right. So another thing is that, I mean, now a lot of people seem to be migrating to the rural setting and attractiveness to this. So how does one do that without disrupting the harmony or imposing to go down the same road as the city, which is, I mean, when you talked about composting toilet, it's a lifestyle change in a way, right? In a small way. So
Even for most village folks, to be honest.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So how do, I mean, are people ready for something like this?
So one
Is
thing we
lifestyle
caution,
change comes? Yeah,
yeah. So one thing we caution people about, and this is something we've learned ourselves, and I don't think we've learned ourselves. It's more something we tell ourselves every day as we
right,
go and work there and plan things there and so on and so forth. That we have to be very conscious about not carrying too much of the city into the village
right,
in terms of our needs and our dependencies. There are positive ideas you can carry from the city today, because the villages have lost a lot over the years, right? So the ideas of collaboration, there are. It's not like the city is all bad and the village is all good, or vice
right,
versa, right? So first of all, most folks who are doing this, transition, uh, need to not carry very romantic ideas of village living when they head there,
right,
because they're just setting up themselves for failure, right? So the sun is harsh, the landscape is tough, there is casteism, there are superstitions, you will encounter irrationality, all of that, right? And it's part of the whole package, right?
right,
It's not going to be rosy in all respects all the time.
right,
So you got to keep it real, but at the same time remember not to carry too much of the city in there. As in, if you go and expecting, what I can afford to uh, live exactly how I was living in my Kormangla house or Sarjapura Road apartment, that's not going to happen, right? That will either end up bringing the same problems to the place where you went to escape from
Right.
the problem,
Right.
right? Or you will find a lot of dissonance and frustration in your journey. Yeah.
Right. So in this sense, how, like, has there been how have how is the rural side reflected on this? Like, has there been a response which is like positive or negative, or is it, how have they taken this kind of a change where they see a lot of urban population moving there, and since you also run like large landscapes, so how is their reaction been?
So I think first is, I mean, people slot you, right? When you go in initially, people just slot you as yet another development. They have seen these gated communities come up in all sorts of places, and they kind of slot you there.
Right.
And for a while, the houses don't get built and the roads don't get built, and the JCBs don't flatten the earth completely. So that
Right.
gets them thinking a little bit, and they see you doing a lot of planting and a lot of weird earthworks and stuff they haven't come across. So they get curious about it. You're the source of much amusement in the village, right? But over time, what we've also observed, there's a little bit of a healthy respect around this. So in Tagati, we've heard that what people have tried growing trees here earlier. You seem to be the first guys who have succeeded, right?
Right.
We've actually said this in discussions and arguments and all of that with them, that we are here trying to plant more trees. We are here trying to green the landscape more, and that's our intent really. So sometimes they're not sure of your intentions, and they're a little anxious and suspicious about it, because after all, you're coming in big cars, and there
Yeah.
is an economic difference.
Yeah.
So it's almost natural um, for every action of yours to be looked at suspiciously. So
Right.
anybody who plants a tree is a good person to a certain extent,
Mhm.
right? So it rubs off eventually.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't think there's a very prominent positive or negative perception,
Mm.
but it comprises of a lot of these little um, micro perceptions, if you will.
Nice. Have there been instances where the villagers have actually imitated or adopted some of the practices that we've been doing at TVC or in any of these collectives?
No, not yet. I mean, in one case, one of our that is actually a very big move, because when we were doing the fencing to prevent grazing, to
Right.
reduce grazing, one of our neighbors actually asked us to do the fence around their piece of land.
Oh,
And if
awesome.
you
Okay.
understand, rural contexts, it's a huge show of faith,
Yeah.
because now your fence runs around their land, and they don't feel threatened that you will include their land in yours, that you will
Right.
usurp their
Right.
land. So which means they actually have, it's a huge demonstration of trust.
Yeah.
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 So that is
Also,
a, yeah. Please
also
go
it's a
ahead.
bit of aesthetics also, right? Because a lot of them do it with chapdi and, like, the kadis and
Yeah. Yeah.
the wire, but we've
Yeah.
also done it with
Bamboo and
bamboo and wire. So it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
So,
it's
but
interesting.
for them to trust you like that is a huge, huge, huge step.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That means that they're also kind of opening up to what you're doing, and they also have eyes on what's happening out there on the farm,
Yeah. Yeah. Of
at a
course,
larger.
eyes there all the time,
Right.
absolutely all the time. I'm sure every step is scrutinized, discussed.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, Interesting. So I think it will also be interesting. I mean, we were also talking about it at Ananas, that it will be interesting to do some sort of an ethnographic study, like a socio-ethnographic study at a community like TVC or a Pumale, to see what they are thinking. I think there was somebody there who was living in the village to understand
Yes. Yes.
what
For a
they're
bit.
thinking, right?
Yeah.
So it'll probably be an interesting
Yeah, it was
understanding.
actually fascinating to understand what's been going on
Right.
in their heads
Right.
over time.
So the next thing is something that we also get asked a lot, which is that about uh, the revenue of it. Like, what is the sustainable form of revenue for communities like these, and what are the people who buy into this? What are they expecting uh, in the form of revenue, and
Sure.
apart from the intangibles that they get?
So, I mean, we were ourselves calling them intangibles and stuff like that till about a month and a half ago. But in the last 1 month and 1.5 months, everything has changed, right?
Yeah.
So, having your own source of reliable source of food and water is like a big thing. It's a big part of investment today.
Right.
So like your grandmom used to buy gold,
Hmm.
right? You need to have a farm with food and water.
Right.
In terms of the revenue, the goals have always been that the farm has to be self-sustainable, right? We've also, but it's a tightrope that you're walking. You are working on degraded land. You are trying to rejuvenate it, and you do not want to stress the land too early. Right?
Right.
You want to push the land to somehow produce that money. So we've had that conversation very openly that the cheapest way of doing this is to have a single, watchman for the entire land, fence it, and leave it alone for a decade, and it'll grow back on its own, and it'll cost nothing, right? And from there on, you add two people, you add a little more work and expectation, and so on and so forth. So we've decided on a model where we have about 10 people on at the farm, and we are able to extend uh, 7 to 10 acres at a time, right? In each season, and slowly we've actually managed to do a majority of the farm over the last 3 years. So so the hope is that it'll at least produce enough food for the team. It'll produce food for the members there. It'll have a little bit of surplus that pays for their salaries, and hospitality will also kick in and pitch in with this in the early years. Over time, as the farm matures and the soil matures, the produce will actually from most of this. That's how we're looking at this whole thing. Beyond that, ROI, we've never done any ROI calculations on this because the focus is more to be um, sustainable and like you got to be water positive, you got to be energy positive, you got to be cash positive, you got to be carbon positive, right? But
Right.
you're not trying to make a huge surplus on anything as a primary intent, right? The surpluses may happen from time to time when there is a nice bounty in something, or the price of something goes up, or there's a lot of rainfall and you collect water and so on and so forth. But you're not shooting for those things. You're not shooting for surplus. Surpluses
Right.
happen. Yeah.
Right. So that's typically the permaculture model that we've also been working with, right? Like, one is share and
Yeah,
sell
we've
the
learned a lot
surplus,
from
and
that. Yeah.
so it's interesting. We were having the TVC meeting the other day, and Varun came up with this interesting question where he asked, uh, so if you were to recommend this kind of a lifestyle where you move out and you set up, like, you take up about 200 acres and set up a farm and a life there. What are the Would you recommend it to somebody, and what are the challenges that you would face? I think this was just after you left the meeting or just before. I don't know if you had the chance to.
Oh,
Uh,
I heard the question. I didn't hear all the responses, but I heard.
right. But what's your reflection been of people that you meet? Do you think there is a lot of movement like this that's going to pick up, especially after now?
I've had 4 calls since the morning on, yeah, and two
Oh.
yesterday, and yeah, it's like that now. So a lot of people are actively thinking about it. I
Uh-huh.
think the the fact that everybody got forced into working remotely has opened up people to the idea that they can, and once it's
Uh-huh.
remote, location is not a restriction anymore. If
Right.
they could, a lot of people would be out there. Farms are great places. Why would you choose to live in a small place cooped up in the city workforces out there if you
Mm.
can. If you're
Mm.
today, the two answers are your work and the kids' school, right? And work just got
Right.
solved for a lot of people. If a company like TCS comes out and says that only 25% of their workforce ever needs to be in office, that's a very,
Right.
very big statement, right?
Right. Right.
Schools are still not solved, but I think some communities being out there, etc., will be pioneers and they'll actually end up solving these things. So it's not just
Mm.
about the farms; it's also about the rest of the
Mm.
ecosystem. It's about art in the village,
Right.
metallurgy in the village, and so on and so forth. It's about it's how Indian villages used to till not that long ago.
So that's interesting, because now that with this, like, a lot of companies are realizing that, okay, so you can work from home and so on. Actually, this was the community's response also, saying that, uh, how are we going to, like, if we had good internet connection there, and if you're living on the farm, we're getting our food from there, there's enough water, there's all our bare essentials are taken care of, and if we just had internet, we would be able to be connected, and we would also be working. But then the idea is that the idea of work also changes, right? You may not actually go ahead with the same job that you are actually doing, and
That is
it
that is
so are people, has there been an instance, or how advanced is the community right now to come to that level of thinking where they say that, okay, so now if I'm sustainable, then I don't have to think about my revenue from the conventional job that I have, and I can actually pursue something more, which can possibly feed and
I think that's
follow
a larger
passion.
question. It's also dependent on your life stage. Like a lot of people have done it for enough years and want to move on to something else, right?
Right.
Some people are in the thick of it. It's the skill set they have right now, and it's the skill set they want to make use of right now. So, like, you have to remember one thing. Even 30 or 40 years ago, when my like when my dad was in the village, um, not everybody in the village was a farmer, right? There were
Mm.
various professions, and even the farmers were doing various things, right? When I'm in Coorg at my farm, I very often I work 2 hours in the morning, then I log into the laptop and answer all the mails and do my online stuff, and have an afternoon siesta, do a little more in the evening, and work on the farm again in the evening. So
Right.
so a lot of hybrid models will emerge, right? The over specialization that we have seen happening in the world um, need not exist if you're living like that. So I don't think that it's about quitting X and doing Y.
Mm-hmm.
It's that some people will do this, some people will do that, some people will do both. There'll be various hybrids. But at the end of the day, that space, that community will actually have a whole variety of skills that emerge there, right? Like I keep saying, why shouldn't there be a design school at Tagati, and why shouldn't there be a permaculture college at Kumale, right?
Right. Right. Interesting. So, in terms of self sustainability and in terms of building a regenerative system and so on, so what are the, apart from like the food, water, homes, and of course finance, which is that you need to be self sustainable in terms of your revenue that's coming in. What are the other things that you are looking at um, in the future for these communities in terms of self
So
reliance?
part of part of the collective was the collective itself, right? If
Mm.
there are 50 people, you will have like one of the members has decided to set up an art school. They've actually
Oh,
bought
nice.
a little piece of land adjoining the farm itself, and they want to set up an art school there, right? Somebody will have design skills, somebody will do something with education and all of that, and doesn't have to be designed upfront. It can grow in an organic sort of way, depending on the skill sets and the interests of people who are involved there, right? So but it's important. Like if this ecosystem emerges, right? If a variety of these skills and these capacities emerge in the community and the village, right? That's when it has really uh, become a part of the community there. That's when it's not just a farm that people own there. It's just actually become a part of Tagati and become a part of Odipura. So I think those are important aspects for the collective to really succeed in some sense. Yeah. Apart from that, you just have to be on the fundamentals. Like I said, you have to be water positive and carbon positive and nitrogen positive and energy positive and so on and so forth.
Right.
Those would be the idea. Those would be the goals.
One of the questions that like one of our teammates asked is basically, do you think a collective can achieve a level of production and complexity needed to make critical things like antibiotics and other life-saving medication locally? If yes, how could you get it there? If not, what roadmap can it follow to improve public health and longevity within that community? Uh, so I thought it was interesting in terms of like it doesn't fall in the realm of like the bare essentials, but it also extends to how are we building that resilience in terms of health.
So it's a parallel thought I'm exploring in my head, not necessarily with respect to the collectives themselves, but the idea of adding capacities to a village. So it may not be a village; it may be like a cluster of 5 villages or so. But and you may not get the best healthcare, and there are various grades of it. So you don't need a super speciality hospital in it, but you need the first line of defense. You need some basic emergency. Um, you know, you need to address some of these basics basically. Um,
Right.
I'm not a medical professional, so I don't know how much we can address healthcare out there. But there's an argument we made very often that if you switch the lifestyle itself, your need for medical becomes, right. Your attitudes towards some of these things change, right? Like a 87-year-old told me once, and he was living about from where he was out there, and I said, you know what, you're living here alone, and your family's in Indranagar, and what happens if? And I said, young man, I'll die one day. I can't wake up every day in the fear of dying, right? And that said a lot to me then. It was very revealing, and I think some of those things change, right? Like I see a lot of folks in Kurg and other places I will visit who are 80-year-old, who are very fit and who are a very young 80 years old. They are not debilitated. They're not struggling, right? Yeah. So they may die tomorrow morning, but till then they have a great life, right? And they have a pretty fit life. So I think some of those attitudes will change, right? Yes, we do need to build healthcare, and I'm assuming as more of this happens, maybe the 50 of us will not be able to solve healthcare. Maybe one of us will have a connect where we'll be able to at least create like a Sunday clinic or something like that, right? I don't know the answers, but if this 50 becomes 500, becomes 5,000, these things will start to get solved by default,
Right.
right? And I
Right.
think I think I think yeah, I think it'll just happen over time as more and more people take this option.
Nice. So one other thing is that the popular question of sorts that we have these days. You think this is going to? You also mentioned that you had like 4 calls before this, which talks about this, which is that what does the future hold for us, like with the whole the virus and all of that. We've kind of our failures have kind of been exposed in a way, and so what do you think? What do you think holds for us? Like where do you think we go with this in terms of what do you think we need to change as a society? Because a lot of us urban people moving out into the farms may not be the most feasible solution, but where do we draw the line for this?
To be very honest, I do believe that we'll suck as farmers.
Yeah.
Because we have to unlearn a lot, and we are not the most efficient with our bodies, with our with our physical abilities. with our understanding of the seasons of seeds and all of that, right? We have to look at charts for companion planting, whereas a lot of people who have been practitioners out there in the farm just know it off the top of their heads, right? But we have the platform, the capability, and the inclination to experiment with this right now, right? And this experimentation is needed. I mean, we've already seen in the last 4 years there have been two major rounds of flooding. There's been the Australian bushfires. There's been the pandemic. Uh, the virus itself will come and go. Like you saw the queues this morning, right? People forget the virus and hit the liquor stores very quickly, right? So the virus will come and go, but there'll be another one, and there'll be a drought, and there'll be a very this monsoon is predicted to be extremely heavy. So Kerala is in for it again, and so may Coorg. So this kind of disruption is going to come again and again and again, right? The problems that you hear with this. Oh, there was seasonal rain destroyed it. And what the hell is an unseasonal rain? It's just rain. It's unseasonal because of our expectation of it coming at a particular time, right? So, like, I didn't see the forest in Pumale crib about the unseasonal rain at all, right? It just did something with it. So we got to adapt to this, and our adaptation will go through some of these experiments, right? We've done a whole bunch of these experiments, and people who are trying to do this, who are not the most efficient people to actually do this right now, but they will lead a few of these experiments, and I think we will see it go mainstream in a bit. Like a lot of countries, like Britain, has realized that most of their foods comes from outside, right? You may not have the best weather, but you still got to try growing it there, and so on and so forth. So a lot of places will realize that they got to give it a shot. They got to try something, right? The next decade will be learned, will be spent relearning this in a lot of places across the world. I think that will happen, whether we like it or not.
It's true. So one other thing was that if like, what would be your advice for people who are like, one is starting out their own communities, or buying into these communities? So what are the things that what was the heads up that you would give them?
What's the heads up that you'll give them? Keep your expectations realistic. Keep your costs low. Stay lean so that you can, because by definition, when you're experimenting, you will try multiple things, and if you put uh, too much behind one idea, one thing, one method, one principle, and you're not even giving yourself a chance to make mistakes and relearn, right? So give yourself that rope in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of patience, and all of that. If you load the idea and the experiment with too much, and I see a lot of I studied a lot of farms before we started this. A lot of farms go into limp mode in a year's time because people are going in again. It's a little bit of carrying the city with you. You expect to do X, Y, and Z and see a particular outcome, right? And when it doesn't happen, you feel frustration, and that's a very city training that all of us have gone through, right? When it doesn't work, we feel really frustrated about it. We don't just say, okay, let me try something again. And we're doing one of the chats with Sandeep, who's actually gone through various thought processes over the years, and almost done like a reboot in his head, multiple times. And that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very as even an individual farm. It's important to give yourself that role.
Right. And also one other thing that I've realized is that, I mean, you also work in different contexts, right? Like, for example, Pumale is so different from TVC, which is like also different from other communities that you in Krishnagiri and so on. So, I mean, one is preparing people for this kind of a life, or setting expectations for that particular land and landscape, right? So how, that's another thing that you would also have to do with them, right? So for people who've seen TVC and for people who've seen Pumale, it's like we also struggle with saying that, oh, Pumale is like it's the rainforest. It's like, and how do you sort of adapt to that?
Yes.
So how do you sort of maneuver that?
When you say prepare, what are you really referring to?
So I'm referring to the point where, like, this is something that we also talk about, which is where we say that, in Pumale, like, it's necessary for people to really make a lifestyle change. Not as much in TVC actually. So here, how are we living with the
Mhm.
forest? Are we living in the forest? And how, like, our footprint needs to be much more minimal than TVC, right? So, how do you
Right.
sort of cushion this to, before selling this idea to somebody? How do you cushion this to people and tell them that this is what it's going to be like, instead of it being a shocking discovery after they buy into the whole place? So, or do you even do that?
So I think as a step one, it's important for us ourselves to understand what
Right,
a particular place means and what it implies. Right? When we said it's a
right,
wildlife zone, that it's a wildlife friendly property, wildlife focused property. It means that the needs of the wildlife is suddenly placed right at the top of all the needs,
right.
right? And then that we will make trade-offs and we make compromises to defer to those needs,
Mm.
right? Which means if there are which meant that okay, you will only walk in certain paths, and you will only, there'll be like curfew hours in certain zones and so on and so forth. So be it, right? So
Right.
so first we need to understand this well ourselves, and we talk about it, as you would have noticed in the communication and everything else, in, as direct a way as possible. We do not try to, like I do not try to tell people that no, TVC has great climate,
Right.
right? It is hot in the summer. What the hell will you do,
Right.
right? I mean, uh, can you do something about it? Yes, it is up to the members. It's up to our efforts to make sure it gets less hot. The heat is manageable. We plant a lot more hongit trees, and there's places to sit in the shade and so on and so forth. But the heat is just as a matter of fact. And in fact, if you're starting to see 37 and 38 today, um, it's very likely that you're going to see the mid to upper 40s in a decade or a decade and a half,
Right.
right? So you make the landscape a lot more shock resistant.
Right.
That's all it is. And that's true in TVC, and that's true everywhere else. You will have leeches in the monsoon. You got to get used to it. You got to figure out when not to walk, where not to walk if you don't like leeches at all. And
Right.
we don't mince words on that. We don't paint a different picture at any point of time. We also tell people that it's we actually keep saying that it's going to be tough, it's going to be tough, it's going to be tough a lot. Because if you set
Mm.
expectations here, people are usually better off when they actually see it. Like, oh, it's not that bad. So we do that.
Nice. Cool. So we'll go into our last question. You're actually super eloquent on Facebook, and like, we love reading the stuff that you write. One of the things that you actually wrote was about uh, the linearization, the proclivity of oversimplifying and looking for silver bullets, and acknowledging complex systems is important. And this is the dynamic systems in balance is wreaked havoc. So this is like a very interesting thing that I thought that we also face, that like a lot of people think about, because of our education, or I don't know what it is, that we think in a linear fashion. So
Yeah.
with this with this breaking point of, like, let's say the virus is there and then we have the lockdowns and so on, what would be that what would be the learnings that you would take forward from here into your communities or into your practice itself?
Uh, Not so. Yeah, there will be a few learnings for sure. Uh, I think some mistakes are being made right now. Like, for instance, we are hammering home a point that from here on everybody will just stay away from each other and wash hands very often, right? And I think that's a recipe for disaster. because socially, biologically, we were not meant to stay distant, right? Like biologically, the more microbes you come in contact with, the stronger you are, right? That old adage of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger
Right.
is very, 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 very true, right? And that's what evolution and biology are built around. So it's a habit. It's a habit that we need right now. But it's what my nightmare scenario on this is that we our immunity and our exposure to a wide variety of pathogens falls over a few months, and then this hits really really hard, or a variant or another one or something like that, right?
Wow.
Because
Yeah.
then we suddenly lowered our defenses completely, right?
Right.
And collectively we need to understand this, that so the collective is not just the 50 members, but it's all the things that happen on the farm, including all the biological activity above, below the soil, and all of that, right? And how critically we are dependent on it. When we talk about diversity, it's not just a nice word, right? And the same
Right.
diversity can of course kill you as an individual, but as a collective it does make you stronger. And you see that in the forest all the time, right? Though some of those things will take out a plant or a particular pest or an animal, but collectively it's a system in balance. And that's something we need to understand really, really well going forward as a species, actually. Yeah. So I hope we understand and practice that at our farms a lot more.
Cool. Thank you so much, Samir, for
Hey,
being a part of this.
my pleasure.
And yeah, it's been super inspiring to know more from you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you talk to you like this. It's like you can go on and on about
Likewise.
communities and so cool. Thanks so much. So
All right.
thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.